On today's show, we are in the middle of the offseason, but a little bit of a glimmer of hope on the horizon because the NBA released its schedule for 2024 and 2025 on Thursday afternoon, and the Hawks have a full slate of offerings. As always, we'll break it all down on today's podcast, and all that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1783 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday afternoon here in mid-August. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's number one sportsbook. And this summer, they're giving all customers a boost or a bonus every single day, all summer long. And the place to go is FanDuel.com. Add a big win to your summer bucket list. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the show anywhere you might find podcasts. On the audio side, that includes places like Apple and Spotify and Overcast. Also, we are on YouTube, so please go ahead and like this episode as you are watching it on that platform. Please subscribe and enable notifications, all that fun stuff to let yourself know when the podcast is going to be coming to you. And it's Thursday afternoon. I waited intentionally for this podcast because a little birdie told me last week the NBA schedule was likely to come out by the time we got to like Monday or Tuesday. It was definitely coming out. The NBA Cup schedule came out earlier this week. And then at 3 o'clock Eastern time on Thursday, August 15th, the NBA released its schedule in full. And that'll be the entirety of the focus of this podcast. We'll kind of go through what transpired, what was announced, the takeaways as far as like schedule strength is concerned, observations, your mailbag questions at the end of the podcast, and wall-to-wall on the schedule because we're firmly in the dead zone, but still plenty to talk about with regard to the 82-game slate that has now been announced. So the opener is obviously one to circle always. It's the announcement that everything is going to be up and running again. And it's pretty favorable this time around at the beginning of the schedule for the Hawks, I have to say. So we'll start there. The Brooklyn Nets are going to be coming to Atlanta for the home opener, which is also the overall opener for Atlanta. It's Wednesday, October the 23rd. The league opening date is October 22nd. There's always that doubleheader nationally the day before. The Hawks are not playing in that, unsurprisingly. And I would say it's about as juicy as it possibly could be as far as getting a win is concerned. And it's followed up, by the way, with the Hornets at home in the second game of the season. So a pretty decent chance to be 2-0 for the Hawks. I won't go through the entire schedule and say win or loss. That'd be pretty crazy content to do in mid-August. But the Hawks will be favored in both those games, barring disaster. And, there's sort of two schools of thought here. From a fan perspective, it would be interesting to have a more high-profile game to open the season in some respects. Brooklyn is one of the least appealing teams in the league this year, honestly, from a casual fan perspective. If you're the Hawks, though, you know that people are going to come to the opener no matter what. And you know people are going to watch the opener no matter what. So it doesn't actually hurt you to have a team that's beatable for sure and also not going to be one that would have drawn a huge crowd later in the season probably. So that's pretty favorable in itself. And also the Hawks get to play the Wizards twice in the first 5 games as well. So a chance to start pretty strongly. The Hawks have 4 of the first 5 games on the schedule are very favorable against teams that I think that they are better than at this point in time. Of course, from there, things get more difficult because no matter what, there are easy pockets or easier pockets. Nothing's easy in the NBA, and then there's more difficult pockets along the way. After that, they actually have a stretch of 9 games in 14 days from like late October into November. So it gets busy and frequent in a hurry. And at the end of the schedule, by the way, we'll kind of fast forward and then we'll come back. At the very, very end of this schedule, they play a home game against Orlando in that customary early afternoon slot. The whole league plays in the afternoon on the Sunday, April 13th slot, 1 p.m. start. Pretty tough, actually, for the Hawks at the end of the schedule. If they're pushing for the playoffs, obviously we won't know that for a while. But if they have to kind of win to get in kind of situation, they got to play Golden State, Philadelphia, at Houston, at Miami, at Milwaukee, at Dallas, home for New York, at Orlando, at Philly, and then home for Orlando, all within the last like 3 weeks or so. So that's pretty difficult to end things. Just keep that in mind for later. If the Hawks are kind of teetering a little bit, they're going to have to finish strong, or they might be on the outside looking in by the end. But look, the headliner beyond all that is kind of there are no special games, we'll say, quote unquote special games. For instance, last year the Hawks played in Mexico City in a standalone game against Orlando. Ended up being a pretty memorable game actually, but it was kind of a league showcase kind of night. None of that stuff's on the schedule this time around for the Hawks. In fact, the annual tradition of the Hawks having kind of their one regular standalone national TV game the schedule was Martin Luther King Day in mid-January, and this time around, the Hawks are playing on that day, but not at home. So the Hawks do play, again, in New York against the Knicks that afternoon, but it's not even on national TV. It's a very anonymous game. The Knicks are a popular franchise, had a good year last year. That game will get some attention, I'm sure, on a holiday. But it's been a while since the Hawks have not played on MLK Day. If you are new to the Hawks or new to the city or whatever, it's usually a pretty big festive atmosphere in Atlanta on that day. And it's been a tradition for a long time. In fact, the last time the Hawks did not play at home on that day was in 2017. And there was a pretty big reaction to that scheduling when it happened. It was very negative. They also, by the way, played in New York that day as well. So that's interesting in itself. Before that, it had been since 1999 that they had not played in Atlanta on MLK Day. And because that year, the season that didn't actually start, there was a work stoppage. So there was actually no games on that day. And then the year before that, there was some, the Hawks were moving to what became State Farm. It became Phillips. Anyway, they have regularly played on this day for a long time. In fact, this is going to be the only second time since 2000. So keep that in mind. Like, I'm sure I have listeners that were not even born in 2000. It's a tradition. It's a tradition in the city. Everyone loves it. I love it. It's always a lot of fun. The only thing I have heard about this, and I don't know how firm this is as quote unquote the reason, but I have heard through the grapevine and also just through logic, but also like actually from source people, that the biggest reason the Hawks do not have the game this year on MLK Day is because that is the same day as the national championship game in college football, which is hosted at Mercedes-Benz Stadium next door. So could the Hawks have played in the afternoon? 100% yes. So if you don't think that's a good enough excuse, I'm kind of on your side, to be honest with you. That is the explanation, more so than one that I am satisfied with. At the same time, that's what I was told as like a big reason for this. But yeah, in the last 25 years, the Hawks have played at home on MLK Day every year but one, and now it's going to be two. People are not happy about that. I don't blame you at all. I don't love this. They will be playing, but yeah, a little bit unsettled there, of course, and that was kind of the reaction. I would say the biggest reaction that happened online, probably in part because I said it and reported it like right away, but still, tough scene there. Anyway, we will dive in to the West Coast trips, to the long homestands, to the holiday stuff that's not MLK Day, to the series and the afternoon games and back-to-backs and national TV games, all that stuff coming up, I promise you, on the podcast. But first, a word from our partners on today's show. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime, and Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. They help you get the basketball tickets that you're looking for, as well as baseball tickets and much more. Help you do it faster and easier with last-minute deals, all-in prices, viewership receipts, and the lowest possible price guarantee with Gametime. It makes Gametime a fantastic option that makes things easy for you across the board when buying tickets. I've been using the app for a long time now. It's come in handy for me a number of different times with Brave stuff and Falcons tickets and Atlanta United, other shows and concerts across the city and the country. At Gametime, save big when buying last-minute tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and much more. They have flash deals. You can save big money and save even more when you choose a section and let them choose the seats for you in that section at Gametime. They also have this awesome feature where you actually toggle to show the total up front. No surprise fees when you get to the end of the checkout process. Also get a view from your seats in the app before you buy those tickets so you know what you're getting into, and you're getting the lowest possible price with the folks at Gametime. Take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app today, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and read that promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase with Gametime. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we've covered the controversy of the lack of an MLK Day game in Atlanta. Now we'll kind of dig a little bit deeper. The Hawks have, of course, every year they have two West Coast trips, basically, in some form or fashion. And this year, the longest trip the Hawks have is a 6-game, 12-day road trip that begins at the end of December and goes all the way until January the 9th. They actually start in Toronto, which is funny. But then they go to Denver on New Year's Day. Interesting game there. And then the customary LA back-to-back against the Lakers and the Clippers on back-to-back days. Then Utah, and then Phoenix. Every NBA team will tell you that's a grueling trip. It's a long way away. It's a long trip. 12 days, 6 games. That'll be an interesting test. And the Hawks, by the way, have 10 road games in January alone because of that trip in a lot of ways. The other West Coast trip is a little bit shorter. It actually includes a game in Chicago, which is kind of just out that direction. But it also includes trips to Portland, to Sacramento, and then to Golden State in November. They have some longer home stands, nothing as long as that, but they, for instance, have a 6 games in 9 nights. 6 games out of 9 games early in the year at home to begin the season, actually. Then they have a stretch of 10 out of 12 games being at home right after the All-Star break. So some longer pockets of being at home, as you might imagine, to balance the schedule. I mentioned MLK earlier. Other holiday stuff. The Denver game being on New Year's Day is just a little bit strange. It's a Wednesday. It's kind of a strange scheduling quirk there, but a holiday game nonetheless. And then the Hawks have this really, really tight Thanksgiving break turnaround. So the NBA does not play on Thanksgiving traditionally, but the Hawks play on the road in Cleveland on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Then they have to play, as we'll come back to in a second, when it comes to the NBA Cup, they play on Friday afternoon back in Atlanta. So they have to travel, and then they play a 2:30 game on Friday. So a very, very narrow Thanksgiving quote-unquote break for Atlanta this year. If you've been following the league the last few years, there have been some series, quote unquote, where like the Hawks will go and play 2 games in the same city against the same team. Last year it was Toronto. They were there. They also played 3 games in a row in the city of New York. They played the Knicks twice and the Nets once. This year there's none of that on the Hawks schedule on the road. At home, they have a few of these actually. They play, looking at it now, they play the Pacers twice in a row at home. They play the Raptors twice in a row at home. But none of the road series. And I always look at those because it's good for me to kind of travel to those maybe to cover games. But none of those this time around. Just some home sets on the agenda. As far as early and late games, the Hawks have 6 games out of the 82 that are scheduled to be played in the afternoon Eastern time. So the only early game, like super early game, is the last game of the year, 1:00 p.m. Eastern time in April. I believe all the other 5 are 2:30 or later Eastern time. They only have 4 late games, though, so some pretty interesting scheduling there. It used to be that you get a lot of 10 and 10:30 games along the way. This year, only 4 games, 10 o'clock or later. Only 2 of those games are 10:30 games, and they're both the LA games back-to-back, but it's a Friday and a Saturday. So pretty nice for people like me that have to stay up late to cover the team. Nothing crazy on that front. Speaking of back-to-backs, the Hawks have a lot of them, as most teams do. They have 16 back-to-backs this year. Last year was 15, so pretty normal. The whole league average is like 14.9 or so. So the Hawks are a little bit higher than the league average. That's still well down from where it was just a few years ago. League's done a pretty good job of eliminating a lot of those. Like there's no more 4 and 5 game stretches, but for instance, they've done a pretty good job making it a little bit easier along the way. Only 3 of those back-to-backs are road travel back-to-backs, and the rest of them are road home road, etc. And then there's 4 home back-to-back, which is of course a little bit easier. Still tough to play back-to-back days, but no travel in between. Then you have the national TV question. And look, I'm not surprised the Hawks have very few national games. For one, they had a bad year last year. They made the play-in, yes, but they were not where they were supposed to be last year. Number 2, they haven't been good, at least capital G good, in a few years. Number 3, even when they were good, at least in the pre-Trey era, they were not always a national TV draw. So I was anticipating a pretty light schedule here. It's probably even less than I thought. So last year they had 5 scheduled, what I actually refer to as true national TV games. And by the way, when I say that, I mean NBA TV games are separate to me. They get folded in some people's metrics. I don't think those are national TV games. Those are not really the same appeal. They don't get watched on the national network. They usually get broadcast simultaneously, locally, all that stuff. So for me, true national TV games are ESPN, ABC, TNT. For now, that's going to change next year when the whole package changes, but there you go. They had 5 of those last year, and they had 10 NBA TV games last year on the announced schedule preseason. This year, it is 2 actual national TV games and 6 NBA TV games. So declines on both of those. And here's the crazy part. The 2 national TV games are both against San Antonio. Thursday, December 19th in San Antonio, and then Wednesday, February 5th at home against San Antonio. So it's Wembanyama is probably driving that. And of course, Richeche is also French. That will probably be a conversation point. You have I'm not even sure if there was ever actually any real buzz there, but there was, of course, there's the Trey and San Antonio thing. There's the draft pick stuff. There's some built-in conversations, but of course, Wemby is the big draw there. So I'm not surprised that they played the Spurs. In fact, last year, there's a reason why I said this way. The scheduled announcement does not always come to fruition. So last year, they had 5 games scheduled on national TV. They ended up playing 1 of those games. The rest of them got pulled. mostly because Trey was out by that point and the Hawks were not very good and they were kind of late in the year. But the only game last year that ended up actually being on ESPN, TNT, etc., was MLK Day against the Spurs. So Hawks Spurs is apparently a draw for the league. But there you go. NBA TV games, by the way, one of the reasons that I always don't include them is because they change very often because it's very easy to change. There's no cruise. It's just kind of a press the button kind of thing. Just want to say that out loud. The first one of those, by the way, I won't go through all of them, is actually against Dallas in November. Always the attention on that one for Luka and Trey reasons, but there you go. We'll leave it there for now, but the Hawks have a very, very light schedule of national TV games. And look, I don't blame the league. I understand Hawks fans I've seen already this afternoon are mad about this. The big thing is you got to win. If the Hawks win more games this year, they will get more national TV next year. We can complain about it again. There have been times in the last decade plus that I've covered the team that I've been actually bothered by it because the Hawks were legitimately good and not being treated that way by the scheduling. Right now, it's hard to say that. The Hawks have not been that good the last few years. So now they have to prove it and they get back into the graces of the league from that standpoint. There's a website called Positive Residual that does a fantastic job kind of gathering some of the schedule stuff that you would want. I will give them the credit because I am not an expert on any of this stuff, but they pulled some of the broad stuff. I would encourage you to read about even more of this, when it comes to the miles traveled and all that stuff. But that model gives the Hawks actually one of the 10 easiest schedules in the league so far. That factors in travel, factors in rest days, factors in which team has more rest. Opponent strength, of course, is the most important thing in a lot of ways. Altitude is important there. All that's in this model. And the Hawks have a pretty easy schedule in a vacuum. And I know people know this for the most part, but we'll come back to it later on. But not every schedule is created equal, both when it comes to which conference you're in. Of course, if you're in the West, it's a little bit harder than the East, at least traditionally the last few years. But also, which teams do you play in your conference more often than the others? Because some of them you play 3 times, some of them you play 4 times. And just keep it. I'll come back to that in just one second. Also, according to that data from Positive Residual, the Hawks have 12 games with a rest advantage and 12 games with a rest disadvantage. So exactly flat there. Nothing to complain about on that front. Speaking of the 3 times versus 4 times thing, this is part of why the Hawks have an easier schedule. They only have to play Boston, Philadelphia, Indiana, and Cleveland 3 times instead of 4 times. Now, they also play, I believe it's Toronto and Brooklyn 3 times as well. Those are not very good teams on paper, but only having to miss only is big in big quotes here. Playing Boston and Philly in particular 3 times instead of 4 times is very helpful. Indiana and Cleveland still the same thing, so it's pretty favorable on the margins. If you just kind of say what if you had to play Boston 4 times instead of having to play Washington? Washington's in a division, but you know what I mean. That's just a little bit of a small edge for Atlanta that's worth noting. And then one more thing before we get on to the NBA Cup and then your questions at the end of the podcast is some notable matchups. So the biggest one, of course, is DeJounte Murray's return to Atlanta. So also this includes Dyson Daniels and Larry Nance. So the first time they face each other, the Hawks and Pelicans, actually in New Orleans. So that'll be the homecoming for Dyson Daniels and Larry Nance. That game is on November 3rd. So pretty early in the season. And then DeJounte's return to Atlanta is December 2nd. That's the single kind of biggest game to circle as far as a player coming home or going back or whatever. He'll get a tribute video, I'm sure, from the Hawks and circle that one in the meantime. You'll probably see Saddiq Bey in street clothes a lot because they probably won't see him play in Atlanta this year. The Hawks play the Wizards 3 times in the first month of the season, and he probably won't be healthy by then. And then they play one later, but it's in DC. So probably no huge comeback for Saddiq in Atlanta. I'm sure he'll be with the team and probably get his video as well, but there you go. And then, of course, notably, that same matchup is Richeche versus Sarr, which will get some attention nationally, 1 versus 2, as you might imagine. And then one more, I won't get into all of them here, but the Lakers come into town on December 6th. That's always a big game. There's lots of Lakers fans, but I just will note this. There's the draft angle because the Hawks should be rooting against the Lakers all year long. It's an unprotected draft pick that LA owes to Atlanta. So that's number one. Number two is there's a non-zero chance that that's the last time LeBron plays in Atlanta. And no matter what you think about LeBron, I was not a huge Hawks favorite. He beat the Hawks a lot in the playoffs. That would be notable if that's the last time he plays in Atlanta because, of course, he's one of the best of all time. And there you go. Yeah. We'll do one more here. The NBA Cup schedule came out 2 days ago. actually. So I have notes on this a little bit. The Hawks, I don't want to go through the entire format, but basically the Hawks play 4 group stage games. We already knew the group, but it's the Hawks, the Celtics, the Wizards, the Bulls, and the Cavs. Those games are in the midst of the schedule already. And they've officially rebranded, by the way. It's no longer the in-season tournament. It's the NBA Cup officially as of now. But the schedule came out with those. They play Boston on the road, which is a little bit unlucky. That's the one you wanted to get at home potentially. But there you go. It's also the first game of the whole NBA Cup is 7 o'clock in Boston on Tuesday, November 12th. The league does not play on Election Day, which is the week before that. So that's the reason why NBA Cup is starting a week later this time around in some ways. There you go. It's a tough one for sure. They do get the second most difficult game at home against Cleveland. But then they have the Wizards on that Friday, the 15th at home. And they go to Chicago for the game on Friday, the 22nd of November. And then the final NBA Cup group stage game is Black Friday. So the day after Thanksgiving, a 2:30 Eastern time home game. I don't recall the Hawks playing, and I've tried to find this. I don't think the Hawks have ever played a Black Friday afternoon game, at least that I can find, going back quite a ways. So that'll be interesting. Also, it's notable on the football front, because I mentioned that earlier with regard to MLK Day. Georgia Tech is happening on Black Friday night. So that might be part of the reason too. The Hawks may not have wanted to go head-to-head with Georgia Tech with a home game. So I don't know if that's the case, but just want to put that out there. But all of the Cup games are Tuesdays and Fridays. So there you go. And that's an NBA TV game, one of the 6 NBA TV games for the Hawks. If they get out of the group stage, they go to the knockout round, which is the top 8 out of 30. Then you get it. It's the 6 group stage winners and then the 2 wildcard teams. Then it becomes single elimination. You go to Vegas in mid-December for semifinals and the finals. If the Hawks do not make the top 8, they will get rescheduled games on December 12th or 13th, and then another one on the 15th or 16th. So they right now only have 80 games on the schedule. So basically it's like, all right, here you have 80. If you make the NBA Cup knockout round, you keep going. If you don't, you get 2 more games added to your schedule, end up playing 80, 82. If you end up going all the way to the championship, you end up playing 83 games. That's okay. By the way, as of right now, our friends at FanDuel have the Hawks at 200-1 to win the NBA Cup. They probably have to go 4-0 to get a trip to the quarterfinals. Maybe you go 3-1 with a close loss, a couple of lopsided wins, and you get there. But the Hawks will know pretty soon. Like, I think that game against Boston, we'll of course cover it in detail. They probably got to pull the upset there to have a chance. We'll see what happens. But circling that's part of the schedule, and we'll dive into that much more later on. Okay, one more time. We'll break from our sponsor of today's podcast, then we'll get into a couple of your mailbag questions to answer along the way on the schedule. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And summertime means baseball, basketball, and so much more. You can bet it all at the FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel is America's number 1 sportsbook, and this summer, they're hooking us all up. Yes, FanDuel's hooking up all of their customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. Something for everyone, every day, all summer long. You can bet on all of your favorite players, your favorite teams with quick bets and live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The app is really easy to use as well at FanDuel. They have also, if you're looking for across sports betting space, from over-unders to point spreads, money lines, player props, future bets, live betting, and so much more. The app is safe, it's secure, and they cover the entire range of sports as well. Of course, that includes the NBA, which we talk about on this podcast. Then you have the WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so much more. And now is an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, and the place to go is FanDuel.com to get started. One more time, just visit FanDuel.com to get started right now. Start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, a question from James, who says, I want to take a road trip with multiple games on the schedule this year. What is the best one that also has some geographic sense to it to follow the Hawks? So I think there are 2 of these that I like. It's not the most friendly. Like, I looked at this for myself as well, because I am no one's paying to send me places to cover the Hawks, so I have to figure out, be strategic when I can go on the road, etc. But I think one that I like a lot, and probably the one that I would recommend, is a trip to Sacramento and Golden State. It's 2 games in 3 days, November 18th and November 20th. They are about an hour away from each other, so they're in the same kind of general market. Unfortunately, it's a Monday and a Wednesday, but if you can get past that, 2 pretty good teams. The Hawks have a reason to follow the Kings all year long with the draft pick that they are owed by Sacramento. Also, a very nice arena in Sacramento that everybody loves in the league, pretty new. Another great arena in San Francisco, of course, plus the chance to see Steph in person. 2 good games, like very competitive games probably against the Kings and Warriors. So I would circle that one, a fun little trip. And again, two games in 3 days, not a crazy back-to-back or anything like that. And I would do that one if I could. And then the other one I would say is a trip to LA, of course, in early January. Similar reasons there. You have 2 opponents in the Lakers and the Clippers that should be at least pretty interesting in some ways this year. No longer do they play in the same building, though. Clippers have their own building now, which is notable. You can see that actual new arena, I believe, is called the Intuit Dome. It's also a weekend back-to-back. It's a Friday, Saturday back-to-back. So if you wanted to not take vacation days, that's a pretty easy trip there. Same hotel, all that stuff. You want to do that. Also, if you want to get crazy, you could go on the way and stop in Denver. So they played in Denver on New Year's Day before that. Then they have a day off. Then they have the back-to-back in LA. So if you want to go crazy, fly to Denver, spend the day in Denver, cool spot, facing a relatively recent NBA champion. You can see Jokic and all that stuff. Then you fly the rest of the way to LA, stay 2 more days, and then fly home. Pretty cool trip, I would say. If you want the actual super boring one, that's the easiest one to do. It's only 1 game, but anytime you can go to Charlotte, you can drive. If you're from Atlanta, not everybody that listens to the podcast is from Atlanta, but if you're from Atlanta and you want to drive to a game, that's the closest one. Charlotte's about 3.5, 4 hours. Memphis is like 6.5 hours, 6 hours, and Orlando's about the same. So those are the 3 like really easily drivable ones. New Orleans is probably 7 hours or so. But the Hawks play the Hornets on Saturday, November 30th. It's a 6 o'clock game in Charlotte. So if you ever wanted to do the up and back in one day to Charlotte, which I've done many times for work purposes, it's a pretty good time to do it for an earlier game on a Saturday. If you want to go crazy and kind of make your one quick pilgrimage, that is one to go ahead and maybe file away in late November. Also, it's a holiday weekend, so add that on there. Last one on today's show. I forgot to write down who asked me this question. My apologies for not writing this down. So if you sent this question to me, thank you for sending the question. I'm sorry. But the question is, I'm a longtime season ticket holder of the Hawks. I usually try to go to all 41 games at home every year. This year, I'm looking to sell a game or 2. So however you want to answer this, I'm looking for the least appealing home game in your mind. Tell me which one I can miss. So interesting one, obviously here, kind of flipping it around. So why does this one last is like the least appealing game. But just for example, the teams that are projected to be the worst right now by FanDuel and probably just logic in general are the Nets, Wizards, Pistons, Bulls, Blazers, and Jazz in some order. I'm going to eliminate the Blazers and Jazz because they only come once. West Coast teams, they come to Atlanta one time. Portland has some intriguing young guys, Klingon, Scoot Henderson, etc. Utah has an old friend, John Collins. They have Lauri Markkanen, some interesting young guys, Kante George. They're not bad watches. They're not going to be great teams, but they're not terrible watches. That leaves Brooklyn, Washington, Detroit, and Chicago. Personally, I would not include Detroit. I think they've, of course, been awful recently, but they have some pretty interesting young players. Cade Cunningham, Ausar Thompson, plus Ron Holland. Like, I think they might be better this year and more interesting in some ways. I would not try to miss them on purpose. Washington has more appeal this year, too. Alex Sarr, I think he'll probably get some booze locally when he comes to town. Also, they play those games early in the year when people are still fresh, so I wouldn't probably want to avoid those games necessarily. Brooklyn would definitely be on this list, but they play the opener in Atlanta, and they never come back. So if you don't care about the opener at all, you'll be able to make some extra money on your tickets because it's the opener, and that's not going to be a great opponent. Like, Brooklyn is pretty unwatchable in some ways, but I get that it's the opener. So that's up to you. They should be on the list, but it's the opener, so I get it. I am picking Chicago, and I'm picking the Chicago game on the day after Christmas as the one that I would recommend selling / not going to. Number one, it's a holiday, day after Christmas. So if you people's family will be in town, you might have family in town, you might be traveling or whatever. And also people want to go to those games because they're in town. Those games always do well over holiday times because people are in town. They want to go to the Hawks game. It's a good family event, all that stuff. Also, there are lots of Bulls fans in the city. There will be lots of Bulls fans at that game. I can assure you of that. So it'll be a ticket that you certainly can move if you want to and sell if it matters to you. And then, of course, it's a holiday. Yes, so maybe you don't want to be there. But the Bulls are not going to be good. they're not going to be, they won't be awful probably, but they probably won't be very good. They don't have DeRozan anymore. Levine's banged up. They got the Josh Giddey thing going on. They have some interesting players, but not in a way that's like terribly appealing to me. They still have Vucevic. Like I would just not pass. So if I'm picking one game to not go to, and look, I have to cover it. I try to go as many games as I possibly can. Occasionally, I will have to travel and will miss a home game, at least in person. But I try to be at like 38 or 39 every year just because that's my job. But it is what it is. I don't do this. Like if I can go to the game, I go to the game. That's my job. But if you're a fan and you want, and look, you're asking me to pick one, I would say the opener if you want to get crazy. And if you don't want to do that, Bulls December 26th would be the one that I would circle as a pretty movable, interesting game to pass on. Maybe watch from home or whatever. Always watch. And by the way, if you don't watch the game, I recommend listening to this podcast because I usually have a podcast about said game. So, all right, that's all I have on the schedule. I'm sure it'll come up more in the future. There's angles that I could explore. I wasn't going to go like line by line by line talking about how the Hawks have this, gauntlet or whatever. They can start positively. It's a tough end of the schedule for sure. They have some pockets, like they have like a bunch of like 4-game homestands. There's one in December. There's one I'm looking at right now, another 4-gamer in like, January. There's a long homestand in March, which I don't know if I mentioned before, but that's the longest one of the year. They don't travel from March 3rd until March 16th. I believe they have 6 games at home in a row in March. So if you are maybe from out of town, that's the other thing I maybe should mention. Like if someone like my guy Glenn Willis, who lives abroad, not abroad, but like outside of Atlanta, if you want to come into town for a few days, couple weeks, not a bad time to do that if the Hawks are in town for a long time. So anyway, I recommend checking out the schedule. It's available to you. That's the best thing about this. You can find all this information. I recommend, again, Positive Residual to do some more deep dives there. But that's my thoughts on the schedule. We'll have a little bit more on this, I'm sure, in the future. But look, we're getting pretty close. The Hawks play a preseason game in 7 weeks or so. They have training camp in 6 weeks, something like that. So stay tuned for all of that. I'll have wall-to-wall content. Also, I should say, I had my friend Glenn Willis on the show earlier this week to talk about Vit Krejci in 2 parts. That was fun. Vit's a fun player. Always fun to talk to Glenn. He'll be back in the near future as well to do more of the player capsules. I've had guests on the show. I had David Lee on the show last week or 2 weeks ago at this point in time. Olympic talk. Wall-to-wall stuff on this podcast. We don't go away in the offseason. So go ahead and please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform of choice. I appreciate that very much. Like the show on YouTube. Subscribe, rate, review on Apple, Spotify, etc. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. Also, my written work and my extra work is at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thanks for listening, everybody. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you all next time.